What happens when the most feared warrior race in the galaxy discovers that the quiet, gentle human they've been living alongside isn't just a peaceful farmer, but a sleeping giant from a species that once made the universe tremble? When Marcus Chun married into the Valerian Empire's most prestigious military family, everyone assumed he was just another harmless human refugee seeking protection. For 3 years, he tended his garden, cooked meals, and smiled politely at dinner parties while his wife's relatives whispered about the weak human who couldn't even lift a standard Valerian weapon. But on the day their home world faced annihilation, when massive alien dreadnoughts darkened their skies and death reigned from above, Marcus finally took off the simple wedding ring that had been suppressing more than just his homesickness. The galaxy was about to remember why humans don't just survive, they conquer. And why the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a weapon, a ship, or an army. It's a human with nothing left to lose. Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his forehead as he knelt among the tomato plants in his garden. The twin suns of Valoria Prime cast long shadows across the carefully tended rows of earth vegetables he had somehow managed to grow in alien soil. 3 years of patient work had transformed the barren plot behind his wife's family estate into something that reminded him of home. Something peaceful. Still playing in the dirt, human. The voice belonged to Kextar, his brother-in-law, whose massive 8-foot frame cast an even longer shadow over the garden. The Valorians' 4 arms were crossed in what Marcus had learned was their species' equivalent of disdain. Marcus looked up from his plants, dirt still clinging to his hands, and offered the same gentle smile he always did. Just tending the garden, Kextar. Would you like some fresh tomatoes for dinner? They're almost ready. Kextar's chitinous face twisted in what might have been amusement. Zarabeth could have married a proper Valerian warrior. Instead, she brings home a dirt farmer who can barely lift our training weapons. He shook his head, his mandibles clicking in disapproval. 3 years, and you still haven't proven yourself worthy of our family name. The criticism rolled off Marcus like water. He had heard variations of it since the day he married Zarabeth Vorthak, youngest daughter of the legendary General Thaxime Vorthak. The general had conquered 17 star systems for the Valerian Empire, and his children were expected to marry within their warrior caste. Marcus, a refugee from the destroyed human colony of New Shanghai, definitely didn't fit that expectation. Perhaps you're right, Marcus said mildly, returning his attention to the plants. I'm not much of a warrior. Kextar snorted and stomped away, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Marcus waited until the sound faded before allowing himself a small smile. If only they knew how much effort it took to be this weak. The neural suppressor embedded in his wedding ring hummed softly against his skin. Zarabeth had given it to him on their wedding day, telling him it was a traditional Valerian wedding band that would help him integrate better with their society. He had worn it faithfully for 3 years, letting it dampen his reflexes, slow his thoughts, and suppress the combat conditioning that had been drilled into him since childhood. Being weak was harder than being strong, but Marcus had made his choice. He wanted a quiet life. He wanted peace. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up again. This time, it was Zarabeth herself, her elegant form moving gracefully across the garden. At 7 feet tall, with the typical Valerian build, she could have snapped him in half without effort, but her touch was always gentle when she reached down to help him up. "Ignore my brother," she said softly, her translator converting her clicking speech into words he could understand. "He means well, but he doesn't understand humans." Marcus brushed the dirt from his knees and took her hand. Even through the suppressor's effects, he could feel how careful she was not to hurt him. "I don't mind. He's not wrong about me not being a warrior." Zarabeth's large, multifaceted eyes studied his face. Sometimes Marcus wondered if she suspected there was more to him than he let on, but she had never questioned his past beyond what the refugee documentation had told her. Former farmer from New Shanghai, sole survivor of a hegemony attack, looking for a new start far from the war. All technically true, though woefully incomplete. "My father wants to speak with you," she said. He's received troubling intelligence reports. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the setting suns. General Thax, rarely spoke to him directly, preferring to treat him like a piece of furniture that his daughter had grown inexplicably attached to. If the general wanted to talk, something was wrong. They found General Thaxheim in his study, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts and fleet movements. The old Valorian's battle-scarred carapace bore the marks of a lifetime of warfare, and his four arms moved constantly as he manipulated data streams. He looked up as they entered, his eyes fixing on Marcus with an intensity that made the human glad for his suppressor's calming effects. "Sit," the general commanded, gesturing to a chair that had been modified for human proportions. "We have received word from our deep space monitoring stations. A fleet of unknown design has entered the outer system." Marcus settled into the chair, forcing himself to maintain the slightly bewildered expression he had perfected over the years. "Unknown design, sir? The ships don't match any known configuration in our databases," General Thaxheim continued, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "They're massive, dreadnought-class vessels, at least 50 of them. Our scouts report that they're broadcasting on frequencies we've never encountered before." Zarabeth moved to stand behind Marcus's chair, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Could it be a new hegemony design? They've been expanding their reach. The general's expression darkened. "That's what concerns me. The hegemony has been pushing into this sector for months, testing our defenses. If they've developed new ship classes..." Marcus felt his wife's grip tighten slightly on his shoulder. The hegemony was a collective of aggressive species that had been systematically conquering or destroying any civilization they encountered. They had already wiped out dozens of human colonies, including New Shanghai. The Valerian Empire had been one of the few military powers capable of holding them back, but it had been a costly war. "How long until they reach Valoria Prime?" Zarabeth asked. 18 hours, assuming they maintain current speed," the general replied. "I'm mobilizing the home fleet, but our main battle groups are engaged in the Kepler defense. We'll have to make do with what we have here." Marcus nodded along with the conversation, playing the part of a concerned but helpless civilian. Inside, though, his mind was already calculating fleet compositions, defensive positions, and tactical possibilities. The suppressor couldn't completely eliminate his training, only dampen it. Like trying to think through thick fog, but the thoughts were still there. "Is there anything you need me to do, sir?" he asked. "I know I'm not military, but if there's some way I can help." General Thaxheim's laugh was bitter. "No offense, Marcus, but this is a matter for warriors. The best thing you can do is keep my daughter safe if our defenses fail." "Of course, sir." Marcus squeezed Zarabeth's hand. "I won't let anything happen to her." The general nodded absently, already turning back to his tactical displays. "Zarabeth, I want you to take Marcus to the family bunker. It's reinforced against orbital bombardment and has supplies for several weeks. If the hegemony breaks through..." "Father," Zarabeth interrupted, "you're talking as if we've already lost. The Valerian fleet has never been defeated in home waters." "The Valerian fleet has never faced odds like this," her father replied grimly. 50 dreadnoughts, Zarabeth. Our entire home defense consists of 23 vessels, most of them cruiser class. We're outgunned 5-1. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a familiar anger that the suppressor couldn't quite contain. The hegemony had taken everything from him once before. His colony, his friends, his entire old life. Now they were threatening to take away the peaceful existence he had built here, the woman he loved, and the family that had grudgingly accepted him. "Perhaps we should contact the human refugee fleet," he suggested quietly. "I know there are several thousand humans scattered across the outer colonies. They might be able to provide some assistance." Kextar, who had been standing silently by the door, let out a derisive click. "Human assistance? What could a bunch of dirt farmers and traders possibly do against hegemony dreadnoughts?" Marcus met his brother-in-law's gaze steadily. "You'd be surprised what humans can do when they're motivated." Something in his tone made the room go quiet. General Thaxheim looked up from his displays, studying Marcus with new interest. Zarabeth's grip on his shoulder tightened. "Do you know something about human military capabilities that you haven't shared?" the general asked carefully. Marcus considered his words. The suppressor made it difficult to think clearly, but he could feel the weight of the moment. His peaceful life was about to end whether he wanted it to or not. The question was how many people he could save when it did. "I know that humans have a saying," he said finally. "Never corner a wounded animal. The hegemony has been hunting us across the galaxy for years, killing our colonies, scattering our people. But humans don't stay scattered forever. We have a tendency to regroup." General Thaxheim's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting that the human refugees might have some kind of hidden military organization?" "I'm suggesting that you might want to broadcast on human frequencies and ask for help," Marcus replied. "The worst that happens is nobody answers." The general exchanged a look with his son. Kekstar's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of confusion that Marcus had learned to recognize. "Very well," General Thaxheim said finally. "Zarabeth, help Marcus prepare a message to broadcast on human channels. It can't hurt to ask." As they left the study, Marcus felt Zarabeth's eyes on him. She was definitely suspicious now, but she didn't say anything until they reached their quarters. "Marcus," she said softly, "is there something you need to tell me?" He looked into her multifaceted eyes, seeing concern and love and trust. For 3 years, she had protected him from her family's disapproval, defended his choice to live peacefully, and never questioned why a man who claimed to be a simple farmer sometimes showed flashes of tactical knowledge or situational awareness that seemed far too sophisticated. "I love you," he said, taking her hands in his, "and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. That's all you need to know right now." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "I love you too. But, Marcus, if there's more to your story than you've told me, now might be the time." Marcus felt the suppressor's weight against his finger. Such a small device to contain so much. But perhaps it was time to stop containing it. "Let's prepare that message first," he said. "Then we'll see what happens." As they worked together to craft a plea for help to any humans who might be listening, Marcus found himself remembering things the suppressor had kept buried for 3 years. The weight of power armor, the feel of a plasma rifle in his hands, the cold precision of tactical planning, the faces of friends who had died when the hegemony came to New Shanghai. 18 hours. The enemy would be here in 18 hours, and the Valerian fleet was badly outnumbered. But 18 hours was enough time for a lot of things to happen. Enough time for messages to be received and answered. Enough time for humans scattered across the galaxy to remember why they had survived this long. Enough time for Marcus Chun to decide whether 3 years of peace had been worth it and whether it was time to take off the ring. The message went out on 17 different human emergency frequencies at exactly 0300 ship time. Marcus stood in the communications center, watching the technicians work while General Thaxheim paced behind them like a caged predator. The Valerian officers present seemed skeptical about the whole endeavor, their mandibles clicking in what Marcus recognized as barely contained derision. "Broadcasting on frequency 77 Alpha," the communications officer reported. "No response yet. Try the old colonial defense codes," Marcus suggested quietly. "Frequency 99 Delta." General Thaxheim stopped pacing and fixed Marcus with a stare. "How do you know colonial defense frequencies?" Marcus felt Zarabeth's hand find his, a silent show of support. The suppressor made it difficult to think of a convincing lie, so he settled for a partial truth. "My father served with the colonial defense before the hegemony attacks. He taught me the emergency protocols when I was young. It wasn't entirely false. Colonel David Chun had indeed served with the Colonial Defense Force, and he had taught his son the protocols. What Marcus didn't mention was that he had learned them not as a child, but as a cadet at the Central Military Academy, or that his father's lessons had continued right up until the day Marcus graduated with honors from the Special Operations Command. Still no response on any frequency. the communications officer reported. Kextar stepped forward, his four arms crossed in obvious displeasure. This is a waste of time. Even if there are humans out there, what could they possibly contribute? A few cargo haulers and mining ships? Marcus was about to respond when the communications console erupted in activity. Lights flashed, speakers crackled to life, and suddenly the room was filled with voices. Valerie in control. This is Captain Sarah Mitchell, UES Retribution. We received your distress call. Valerie in control. Commander Zhang Wei, UES Defiance. We're en route to your position. Valerie in control. This is Admiral Elena Vasquez, UES Nemesis. Human Fleet Alpha is moving to assist. The voices kept coming. Ship after ship, captain after captain, all using military protocols and ship designations that made the Valerian officers exchange confused glances. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as he recognized some of the names. Sarah Mitchell had been 2 years ahead of him at the academy. Zhang Wei had served under his father in the Outer Rim campaigns. And Admiral Vasquez. Elena Vasquez had been his commanding officer during the new Shanghai evacuation. She had personally led the rearguard action that allowed the civilian transports to escape while Marcus and his team held the spaceport against hegemony forces. The last time he had seen her, she was ordering him to get on the final transport while she stayed behind to buy more time. Marcus! Zarabeth's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? You look pale. He realized he was gripping her hand hard enough to hurt her. I'm fine, just surprised by the response. General Thaxheim was studying the communications display with new interest. These ship designations, he said slowly. UES stands for United Earth Systems, doesn't it? That was the human military designation before the hegemony war. Yes, sir, Marcus replied carefully. But the UES was supposed to have been destroyed years ago when Earth fell. Marcus met the general's gaze. Reports of our death were greatly exaggerated. Before anyone could respond to that, the main display screen flickered to life. A woman's face appeared, weathered by years of war, but still unmistakably commanding. Admiral Elena Vasquez looked exactly as Marcus remembered her, except for the new scars that crossed her left cheek and the hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. General Thaxheim, she said without preamble, this is Admiral Vasquez of the United Earth Systems Navy. We understand you're facing a hegemony incursion. General Thaxheim straightened to his full, imposing height. Admiral, I must admit, we weren't aware that the UES still existed as a military force. Vasquez's smile was sharp as a blade. We've been operating in the deep void for the past 3 years, conducting asymmetric warfare against hegemony forces. When we received your distress call, every human ship within a 3-day jump responded. We have 47 vessels converging on your position. 47 ships. Kextar blurted out. Where have you been hiding 47 military vessels? In the spaces between the stars, Vasquez replied cryptically. General, our intelligence suggests the hegemony force heading your way consists of 52 dreadnoughts and support vessels. This is a major offensive, not a probing attack. They intend to take Valoria Prime and use it as a staging ground for their next campaign. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as tactical data began flowing across the display. Fleet compositions, weapon loadouts, battle damage assessments from previous engagements. This was military intelligence at the highest level, the kind of data that could only be gathered by an organization with deep space assets and extensive reconnaissance capabilities. Admiral, General Thaxheim said, while we appreciate any assistance you can provide, I should warn you that this is likely to be a difficult battle. The Valerian home fleet consists of only 23 vessels. 23 Valerian vessels, Vasquez corrected. 70 ships total, counting the human fleet. The odds are actually in our favor, assuming your people can work with human tactical doctrine. The general's mandibles clicked in surprise. Human tactical doctrine? General, with respect, your people fight like honorable warriors. The hegemony fights like genocidal monsters. Humans. Vasquez paused, her eyes seeming to look directly at Marcus through the screen. Humans fight like cornered rats, and we've had 3 years to get very good at it. Marcus felt the suppressor's effects wavering as adrenaline flooded his system. On the screen, Admiral Vasquez was outlining a battle plan that was brilliant in its complexity and terrifying in its implications. The human fleet hadn't just survived the fall of Earth. They had evolved into something new, something dangerous. "Sir," he said quietly to General Thaxheim, "I think you should accept the Admiral's proposal." "You think so?" The General's tone was mildly sarcastic. "And what qualifies you to make tactical recommendations?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. The suppressor was making it difficult to think clearly, but he could feel something important trying to surface. Something about the way Admiral Vasquez kept glancing at him through the screen. "Marcus," Vasquez said suddenly, addressing him directly. "Marcus Chun, I wondered if you might be on Valoria Prime." The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to Marcus, who felt the blood drain from his face. General Thaxheim's expression had shifted from mild interest to sharp suspicion. "You know this human?" the general asked Vasquez. "Know him?" Vasquez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "General, Marcus Chun was one of the finest tactical officers I ever served with. He held the new Shanghai spaceport for 6 hours against impossible odds while we evacuated civilians. The last thing he did before I ordered him onto the final transport was jury-rig the spaceport's fusion reactor to deny it to the hegemony forces." Marcus felt Zarabeth's grip on his hand tighten convulsively. Around the room, Valerian officers were staring at him with new eyes. Kekstar's mandibles were clicking so rapidly it sounded like machine gun fire. "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "perhaps we could focus on the current tactical situation." "Of course, Colonel," Vasquez replied, using his old rank deliberately. "Though I have to ask, what's with the neural suppressor? I can see it affecting your speech patterns through the video link." The room erupted in confused voices as every Valerian began talking at once. General Thaxheim roared for silence, his 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of absolute command. When quiet returned, he turned to face Marcus with an expression that could have cut steel. "Colonel," he said very quietly. Marcus looked at Zarabeth, seeing confusion and hurt in her multifaceted eyes. 3 years of lies by omission were about to come crashing down around him. But 18 hours from now, the hegemony would be here, and 47 human ships were preparing to fight for a world that had given him sanctuary. "Zarabeth," he said softly, "I need you to trust me for a few more minutes." She nodded wordlessly, though he could see tears forming in her eyes. Marcus reached up and twisted his wedding ring, disengaging the neural suppressor for the first time in 3 years. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. His posture straightened, his eyes sharpened, and suddenly the tactical displays around the room made perfect sense. He could see the fleet positions, the approach vectors, the optimal defensive formations. His mind began calculating firing solutions and resource allocations with mechanical precision. "General Thaxheim," he said, and his voice carried a new authority that made several officers step back. "My name is Marcus Chun, Colonel, United Earth Systems Special Operations Command. I've been living under deep cover on your world for the past 3 years under the refugee protection protocols. My presence here was not accidental." The general's scarred face had gone very still. "Explain." Marcus gestured to the tactical display, where Admiral Vasquez was watching with obvious satisfaction. 3 years ago, human intelligence identified Valoria Prime as a likely target for hegemony expansion. We placed assets on 17 different worlds throughout this sector, preparing for the day when the hegemony made their move. I volunteered for this assignment. "You volunteered to marry my daughter?" Kekstar's voice was dangerous. Marcus turned to face his brother-in-law, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't hide his true nature. Kekstar actually took a step backward. "I volunteered to protect this world and everyone on it," Marcus said coldly. The marriage was an unexpected development, but not an unwelcome one. He looked at Zarabeth, seeing her struggling to reconcile the mild-mannered gardener she had married with the hard-eyed military officer standing before her. "Zarabeth, everything I told you about loving you is true. Everything I told you about wanting a peaceful life was true. The only thing I didn't tell you was why I was really here." General Thaxheim studied Marcus for a long moment, then looked back at the screen where Admiral Vasquez was waiting patiently. "And now you expect us to trust you to help defend our world?" "No," Marcus said quietly. "I expect you to let us save it." On the screen, Admiral Vasquez smiled. "General, I should mention that the hegemony force isn't just targeting Valoria Prime. Long-range sensors have detected similar fleets moving against 6 other worlds in this sector simultaneously. This is the opening move of a major offensive. If Valoria Prime falls, the entire region will follow within weeks." "How many people?" General Thaxheim asked. "Billions," Marcus answered before Vasquez could respond. "The hegemony doesn't take prisoners, General. They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. They arrive, they destroy everything that opposes them, and they strip the world's bare of resources before moving on. If we can't stop them here, then we stop them here," General Thaxheim said firmly. "Admiral Vasquez, what do you need from us?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of tactical planning and fleet coordination. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, his 3 years of careful observations about Valerian military capabilities proving invaluable as the human and Valerian forces worked out a joint defense strategy. The suppressor's absence left his mind clear and sharp, processing information at a rate that seemed to impress even the veteran Valerian officers. But throughout the planning session, he remained acutely aware of Zarabeth standing silently by his side. She hadn't spoken since his revelation, hadn't asked any questions or made any accusations. She simply watched as her husband transformed from a gentle gardener into a tactical officer coordinating the defense of their world. When Admiral Vasquez finally signed off to prepare her fleet for battle, General Thaxheim turned to face Marcus directly. 3 years, he said. "You've been living in my house, eating at my table, married to my daughter, and planning for a war none of US knew was coming." "Yes, sir. And in all that time, you never gave any indication of your true nature. My son has spent 3 years calling you weak and worthless." Marcus glanced at Kextar, who was staring at him with a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. "Your son wasn't wrong, General. For 3 years, I was exactly what I appear to be. The neural suppressor made sure of that. But now it's off." "Yes, sir." General Thaxheim nodded slowly. "Then, I suppose we'd better put you to work. Colonel Chun, you have operational command of the Joint Human-Valorian Defense Force. Don't make me regret trusting you." As the Valerian officers began filing out to prepare their ships, Zarabeth finally spoke. "Marcus," she said quietly, "look at me." He turned to face her, seeing his own reflection multiplied in her compound eyes. The woman he loved, who had protected him from her family's scorn for 3 years, who had trusted him completely despite never knowing who he really was. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. "Or was I just part of your mission?" The question hit him harder than any enemy weapon ever had. For a moment, Marcus considered putting the suppressor back on, returning to the simple life of a gardener who only wanted peace. But that wasn't an option anymore. In 16 hours, the hegemony would arrive, and every person on this world would need him to be exactly what he was trained to be. "Zarabeth," he said softly, "marrying you was the best decision I ever made. But falling in love with you was never part of any plan. That just happened." She studied his face for a long moment, then reached up to touch his cheek. "I can see the difference in your eyes," she said. "The suppressor really did change you, didn't it?" "It made me smaller," Marcus admitted. "Quieter. Gentler. It let me be the man I wanted to be instead of the weapon I was trained to be." "And now?" Marcus looked out through the command center's windows at the stars, where 47 human ships were converging to help defend a world they had never seen before, where 52 hegemony dreadnoughts were racing toward the people he had sworn to protect. "Now I have to be both," he said. The joint fleet assembled at the edge of Valoria Prime's gravity, looked nothing like the traditional battle formations Marcus had studied at the Academy. Human ships moved in loose, predatory packs, while Valerian vessels maintained their disciplined battle lines. Two completely different philosophies of warfare, trying to work together against an enemy that had already proven capable of destroying both their civilizations separately. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Valerian flagship VFS Sovereign Honor, studying the tactical displays, while Admiral Vasquez's face dominated the main communication screen. Around him, Valerian bridge officers worked with practiced efficiency, their forearms allowing them to manage multiple stations simultaneously. General Thaxheim had insisted on commanding from the front lines, leaving Marcus with operational authority, but not wanting to miss the battle himself. Human Formation Alpha is in position, Admiral Vasquez reported. Beta and Gamma formations are flanking wide, staying dark until the shooting starts. Marcus nodded, manipulating the holographic battle map with movements that were becoming smoother as his muscle memory returned. 3 years of suppression hadn't erased his training, merely buried it. Now that the suppressor was gone, every lesson from the Academy was surfacing with crystal clarity. Valerian 1st Squadron, maintain your position at the gravity well's edge, he commanded through the fleet communication system. 2nd and 3rd Squadrons, fall back to the secondary defense line. I want to draw them in. Colonel, General Thaxheim's voice carried a note of concern. Retreating before the battle even goes against every Valerian tactical doctrine. Marcus turned to face the general, his expression serious. Sir, traditional Valerian tactics assume you're fighting an honorable enemy. The hegemony doesn't understand honor. They understand fear, pain, and overwhelming force. We need to make them overconfident. Let them think they're winning until it's too late to pull back. On the communication screen, Admiral Vasquez smiled grimly. The colonel's right, General. The hegemony has gotten comfortable with quick victories. They expect their enemies to meet them head-on and get crushed in the opening engagement. They're not prepared for a fighting retreat. Kextar stepped up to the tactical station, his mandibles clicking with agitation. You're asking us to run from the enemy? I'm asking you to trust me, Marcus replied calmly. And I'm asking you to remember what happened to every other world that tried to meet the hegemony in conventional battle. How did those engagements end? The bridge fell silent. Every Valerian present knew the answer to that question. 14 star systems had fallen to the hegemony in the past 2 years. 14 worlds that had assembled their fleets, chosen their battle lines, and fought with honor and courage. All of them were dead now. Incoming hyperspace signatures, the sensor officer announced. Massive energy readings at the system's edge. Marcus felt his heartbeat slow, settling into the combat rhythm he had learned years ago. Time seemed to stretch as his enhanced awareness kicked in, processing information with mechanical precision. This was the moment everything had been building toward for 3 years. Count and classification, he ordered. 52 capital ships, hegemony configuration. Dreadnought class, supported by cruisers and destroyers. Total enemy force appears to be Mother of Stars. The sensor officer's voice trailed off as the numbers appeared on the display. Not 52 ships, 137 vessels, with the dreadnoughts forming the core of a massive battle fleet that dwarfed anything the intelligence reports had suggested. General Thaxheim's scarred face went pale. They've doubled their force. No, Marcus said quietly, studying the formation patterns. They've committed their reserve. This isn't a planetary assault anymore. This is designed to be the decisive battle of their entire campaign. Admiral Vasquez's expression on the screen had turned grim. Marcus, they're bringing everything they have. If we lose here, there won't be another chance to stop them in this sector. Marcus stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. 137 enemy ships against 70 Allied vessels. Nearly 2-to-1 odds, and that was assuming the human fleet was as capable as Admiral Vasquez claimed. He had no real idea what condition the surviving human ships were in after 3 years of guerrilla warfare in deep space. "Colonel," General Thaxam said quietly, "do we abort? The family bunker can protect a few dozen people, but—" "No," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "We don't run. We can't run. If the hegemony takes Valoria Prime, they'll use it as a staging ground to hit 6 more systems simultaneously. Millions of people will die, and the survivors will face the same choice we're facing right now." He turned to face the bridge crew, seeing doubt and fear in their alien faces. These were professional military officers, but they were also people with families and friends on the world below. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "the hegemony just made a critical tactical error. They brought their entire reserve to a battle they think they're going to win easily. If we can hurt them badly enough here, they won't have the ships to continue their offensive. And if we can't?" Hextar asked. Marcus met his brother-in-law's gaze. "Then we make sure they pay such a heavy price that the next world they attack has a fighting chance." The hegemony fleet was moving in system now, their ships arranged in the classic formation that had crushed a dozen civilizations. Massive dreadnoughts formed the center, protected by screens of smaller vessels, and supported by carrier groups that would deploy fighter swarms once they reached engagement range. It was overwhelming, methodical, and designed to break enemy morale before the shooting even started. "All units, execute Maneuver Alpha," Marcus commanded. "Valerian squadrons, begin your withdrawal to the secondary line. Human formations, maintain stealth protocols until my signal." On the display, the Valerian ships began pulling back from their forward positions in what appeared to be a panicked retreat. The movement was carefully choreographed to look disorganized while actually maintaining perfect tactical positioning, but Marcus wasn't sure the hegemony would appreciate the subtlety. "Enemy fleet is accelerating," the sensor officer reported. "They're taking the bait." Admiral Vasquez leaned forward on the communication screen. "Marcus, I should mention something about the human fleet composition. We've made some modifications to our ships over the past 3 years." "What kind of modifications?" "The kind that turn mining vessels into torpedo boats and cargo haulers into missile platforms. We've been fighting a guerrilla war against an enemy with superior numbers and firepower. We've had to get creative." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. "Admiral, please tell me you haven't turned civilian ships into suicide bombers." "Not suicide bombers," Vasquez replied with a predatory smile. "Guided missiles. Very large, very fast guided missiles packed with fusion warheads. The crews evacuate to escape pods just before impact." General Thaxam's mandibles clicked in amazement. "That's completely insane." "That's human," Marcus corrected. "Admiral, how many conversion ships do you have?" 23. "The other 24 are proper warships that we've been hiding in the deep void." "But, Marcus, the conversions are one-shot weapons. Once we use them, they're gone." Marcus studied the approaching hegemony fleet, his tactical computer estimating approach times and engagement ranges. 23 sacrificial attacks, if properly coordinated, could punch through the enemy's defenses and reach their capital ships. But timing would be everything. "Hold the conversions in reserve," he ordered. "Let them think they're facing a conventional fleet until the last possible moment." The next hour passed with agonizing slowness as the hegemony fleet crossed the system, their formation tightening as they prepared for battle. The Valerian squadrons continued their staged withdrawal, drawing the enemy deeper into the gravity well where maneuvering would become more difficult. Hidden among the asteroid fields and behind sensor shadows, the human fleet waited like a pack of wolves preparing to strike. "Enemy fleet entering engagement range," the tactical officer announced. "They're launching fighters." Marcus watched as clouds of small craft erupted from the hegemony carriers, thousands of single-pilot attack ships designed to overwhelm point defenses and clear the way for the capital ships. It was a sound tactic, one that had worked against every previous enemy they had faced. "All Valerian squadrons, engage the fighters," Marcus commanded. "Show them what you can do." The space around Valoria Prime erupted in fire as the two fleets finally met. Valerian ships, built for close-range combat, tore into the fighter swarms with devastating effect. Their four-armed gunners could operate multiple weapon systems simultaneously, creating overlapping fields of fire that no single pilot could navigate. Within minutes, the neat hegemony fighter formations dissolved into chaos. But the fighters had done their job. While the Valorians were distracted, the enemy capital ships had closed to within optimal firing range. Hegemony dreadnoughts opening fire, the sensor officer reported. The first enemy salvo lit up the darkness like a miniature star. Massive energy beams and kinetic projectiles reached across space toward the Valerian defense lines. Most of the shots missed their targets, but several Valerian cruisers disappeared in brilliant explosions. First Squadron is taking heavy losses, General Thaxheim reported, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Should we order them to fall back? Marcus watched the tactical display as the battle developed exactly as he had planned. The Valerian fleet was being pushed back, seemingly on the verge of collapse. The hegemony commanders would be feeling confident now, certain that they were witnessing another quick victory. Not yet, he said quietly. Let them get closer. Admiral Vasquez's face on the screen showed no emotion, but Marcus could see the tension in her eyes. Marcus, we need to commit the human fleet soon, or there won't be anything left to support. 60 seconds, Marcus replied, his attention focused on the enemy formation. The hegemony dreadnoughts were pushing forward aggressively now, their massive hulks moving into the gravity well, where their superior speed and maneuverability would be negated. 50 seconds. Another Valerian ship died in nuclear fire. Then another. 40 seconds. Kekstar's mandibles were clicking frantically. Marcus, we're losing ships we can't replace. 30 seconds. Marcus's voice was cold as winter. 20 seconds. The hegemony fleet was fully committed now, their entire formation strung out across millions of kilometers as they pursued what they thought was a broken enemy. Their dreadnoughts had moved ahead of their escorts, confident in their overwhelming firepower. 10 seconds. Marcus's hand hovered over the communication controls. 5 seconds. The hegemony flagship, a massive vessel that dwarfed everything else in the system, had just passed the point of no return. It was too deep in the gravity well to escape quickly, too far ahead of its escorts for mutual support. Admiral Vasquez, Marcus said quietly, execute Order Phoenix. The space around the hegemony fleet exploded into chaos as 47 human ships dropped their stealth systems and opened fire simultaneously. But these weren't the surgical strikes of conventional warfare. The human ships attacked like rabid animals, diving straight into the enemy formation with weapons blazing and no regard for their own survival. 23 converted cargo ships and mining vessels broke from the pack, their engines burning at maximum as they accelerated toward the enemy dreadnoughts. Point defense systems tried desperately to stop them, but the conversion ships were too small, too fast, and too numerous. The first suicide ship reached a hegemony cruiser and detonated its fusion warhead at point-blank range. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface, a brief second sun that outshone the local star. When the light faded, both ships were gone. Then, another detonation. And another. Marcus watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as the human fleet tore into the hegemony formation like a pack of wolves attacking a herd of elephants. This wasn't warfare as the Valorians understood it. This wasn't even warfare as the hegemony understood it. This was something new and terrible, born from 3 years of desperation and the kind of fury that only came from having everything taken away. All Valerian squadrons advance. Marcus commanded. Hit them while they're confused. The tide of battle had turned in less than 5 minutes. The hegemony fleet, caught between the anvil of the Valerian squadrons and the hammer of the human attack, began to break apart. But Marcus knew the fight was far from over. The enemy still had numerical superiority, and a corner predator was always most dangerous. On the communication screen, Admiral Vasquez wiped blood from a cut on her forehead. Her bridge showed signs of damage, but her smile was fierce with battle joy. Phase 1 complete, she reported. 21 confirmed kills, including 7 dreadnoughts. But, Marcus, we've lost 16 ships, including all the conversions. We're down to 31 vessels. Marcus nodded grimly. The human fleet had traded nearly half its strength for a third of the enemy's heavy units. In any traditional analysis, it was a victory. But traditional analysis didn't account for the hegemony's willingness to sacrifice their own ships to achieve victory. Hegemony fleet is regrouping, the censor officer announced. They're forming a new battle line around their remaining dreadnoughts. Marcus studied the reformed enemy fleet. Still over 80 ships, still numerically superior. But their formation was tighter now, more defensive. The hegemony commanders had learned to respect their human opponents. General, Marcus said, turning to Thaxheim, how many ships do we have left? 19 Valerian vessels, still operational. Some damaged, but all combat capable. 50 allied ships against 80-plus enemy vessels. The odds were actually worse now than they had been at the beginning of the battle. But the hegemony fleet was no longer the unstoppable force that had entered the system. They were hurt, confused, and for the first time in years, genuinely afraid of their opponents. Marcus looked around the bridge at the Valerian officers who had accepted him as their commander despite 3 years of deception. At General Thaxheim, who had trusted a supposed dirt farmer with the defense of his homeworld. At Kextar, whose contempt had transformed into something approaching respect. Then, he looked at the communication screen, where Admiral Vasquez was waiting for orders. Behind her, he could see the bridge of a human warship that had spent 3 years fighting a hopeless war against impossible odds and never once considered surrender. Admiral, he said quietly, I think it's time to show them what humans really learned during 3 years in the dark. Vasquez's smile was sharp as broken glass. I was hoping you'd say that, Colonel. Initiating Phase 2. The real battle was about to begin. The second phase of the battle began with a sound that no one in space should have been able to hear. It started as a low harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate through the hull of every ship in the system. Not transmitted through space, but somehow carried through the quantum field fluctuations that the human fleet was generating with their modified drives. The hegemony sensors registered it as an anomaly. The Valerian instruments classified it as interference. But every human in the fleet recognized it immediately. It was music, a battle hymn that had been banned by every civilized government in known space since the end of the colonial wars. The song the human Marines had sung when they stormed the Centauri death camps. The anthem that had played from every human ship during the last stand at Sol. Dies Irae, Admiral Vasquez said quietly over the communication link. The day of wrath. I thought the hegemony should hear it before we show them what it really means. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest as the music swelled through the fleet communication channels. He had heard this song before, years ago during his academy training. It was part of the historical archives, a relic from the darkest period of human expansion when Earth's colonies had carved their empires with fusion fire and relativistic kinetic strikes. The song that played when humanity stopped pretending to be civilized. Admiral, he said carefully, what exactly is Phase 2? Vasquez's expression on the screen was serene, but her eyes held the cold light of distant stars. Phase 2 is what happens when you back a technical species into a corner and kill their children. On the tactical display, the remaining 31 human ships began moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. Instead of maintaining formation or seeking advantageous positions, they spread out across the entire battle space in what appeared to be random distributions. Some dove toward the planet's gravity well, others climbed toward the system's edge, and several simply stopped moving entirely. General Thaxheim studied the display with confusion. What are they doing? They're abandoning any possibility of mutual support. They're not abandoning anything, Marcus replied, his voice tight with understanding. They're setting up a weapons grid. And what? Marcus gestured to the tactical display, where the human ships had finished their deployment. 31 vessels scattered across millions of cubic kilometers, each one holding position with mathematical precision. To a casual observer, it looked like chaos. To someone with advanced tactical training, it looked like the most sophisticated weapons system ever deployed. Each ship is a node in a targeting network, he explained. They're not thinking of themselves as individual vessels anymore. They're thinking of themselves as components of a single massive weapon. Kekstar's mandibles clicked with disbelief. That's impossible. The coordination required, the communication delays across those distances. Human ships have quantum entanglement communicators, Admiral Vasquez said calmly from the screen. No light speed delays. Perfect real-time coordination across any distance. We developed the technology during our 3 years in the void. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Quantum entanglement communication was theoretical technology, something that existed only in the most advanced research papers. The power requirement alone should have made it impossible to deploy on anything smaller than a space station. Admiral, he said slowly, what did you do to your ships? What we had to do, she replied simply. Marcus, do you remember the Prometheus Doctrine? He did remember, and the memory made him sick. The Prometheus Doctrine had been developed during the colonial wars as the ultimate deterrent, a way to ensure that any enemy attack on human civilian populations would result in consequences so severe that surrender would be preferable to victory. It had never been implemented because the war ended before it became necessary. But the theoretical framework was elegant in its simplicity. Take the industrial capacity of an entire civilization, focus it on a single goal, and remove all ethical constraints that might limit effectiveness. The result was technology that advanced by centuries in a matter of years, powered by the kind of desperate innovation that only came from facing extinction. The human fleet isn't a military force anymore, Marcus realized aloud. It's a doomsday weapon. We prefer to think of it as evolution, Vasquez replied. The hegemony taught us that survival requires adaptation. They just never considered what humans might adapt into. The hegemony fleet had regrouped into a defensive formation, their remaining dreadnoughts surrounded by protective screens of smaller vessels. It was a sound tactical position, one that should have been able to withstand any conventional attack. But as the human ships finished their deployment, the space around the enemy formation began to change. Energy readings off the scale, the sensor officer reported, his voice cracking with stress. The human ships are generating some kind of field effect. Marcus watched the display as reality itself began to warp around the hegemony fleet. The human ships weren't firing weapons in any traditional sense. Instead, they were using their quantum drives to manipulate the fundamental forces of physics, turning empty space into a trap that no amount of armor or shields could protect against. Gravity distortion detected, the science officer announced. The human fleet is generating artificial gravity wells around the enemy ships. It was brilliant and terrifying. By creating localized gravity anomalies, the human ships were pulling the hegemony vessels out of their careful formations and into predetermined kill zones. Ships that tried to maneuver found themselves fighting against gravitational forces that shouldn't exist. Weapons fire bent and twisted as space itself curved around the targets. Hegemony flagship attempting to break free. The tactical officer reported. They're burning their drives at 120%. On the display, the massive enemy dreadnought was fighting against an invisible current, its engines blazing with fusion fire as it tried to escape the gravity well that had formed around it. But for every kilometer it gained, the human ships adjusted their field generators, tightening the trap like a closing fist. Admiral, General Thax, said quietly, this technology is beyond anything we've ever seen. How do humans develop it? Vasquez's expression on the screen was haunted. General, when the hegemony destroyed Earth, they killed 12 billion people. 12 billion minds that might have become scientists, engineers, artists, teachers. We decided that the best memorial to our dead would be to become everything they might have been, concentrated into the survivors. Marcus understood now. The human fleet hadn't just been hiding in the void for 3 years. They had been evolving, driven by grief and fury and the kind of focused determination that only came from having nothing left to lose. Every ship was crewed by the survivors of destroyed worlds, people who had watched their entire civilizations burn and decided that the universe needed to learn what that really cost. Phase 2 is proceeding on schedule, Vasquez reported. Gravity wells established around all major enemy units. Beginning selective targeting. The first hegemony dreadnought died without ever being shot. The human ships simply collapsed the artificial gravity well around it, compressing the massive vessel down to the size of a basketball in less than 3 seconds. The resulting implosion was so violent that nearby ships were damaged by the gravitational shockwave. Then, another dreadnought vanished, crushed by forces that turned its hull armor into neutronium. And another. The remaining hegemony ships began firing wildly in all directions, their weapons seeking targets that were scattered across millions of kilometers. Some shots found their mark, and human ships began to die in nuclear fire. But for every human vessel destroyed, 2 or 3 enemy ships were crushed by gravitational forces that made them collapse in on themselves. Hegemony fleet is breaking, the sensor officer announced. Multiple ships attempting to flee the system. Let them go, Marcus commanded. We want survivors to carry word back to their leadership. General Thaxheim looked at him sharply. You want them to escape? I want the Hegemony High Command to know exactly what happened here, Marcus replied. I want them to understand that humans aren't just another species they can exterminate. We're the species that will follow them home and turn their own sons into weapons. On the communication screen, Admiral Vasquez nodded approvingly. The colonel understands the strategic situation. This battle was never about defending one world. It was about sending a message to every aggressive civilization in the galaxy. Marcus watched as the last few hegemony ships limped toward the system's edge, their once mighty fleet reduced to a handful of damaged vessels carrying news of a defeat so complete that it bordered on the impossible. In less than 6 hours, 50 Allied ships had destroyed a force of over 100 enemy vessels while suffering losses of less than 30%. But the victory fell hollow. The human fleet had revealed capabilities that would terrify every other civilization in known space. The technology they had demonstrated made them the most dangerous military force in the galaxy, capable of rewriting the laws of physics to suit their tactical needs. Admiral, Marcus said quietly, what happens now? The other species won't just ignore what they've seen here. Vasquez smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. Now we go back to the void, Marcus. We disappear into the spaces between stars and wait to see if the galaxy learned its lesson. Humanity doesn't want to conquer anyone. We just want to be left alone to rebuild what we lost. And if other species decide that you're too dangerous to leave alive, her smile turned cold. Then they'll discover why we call it the Prometheus Doctrine. Fire stolen from the gods. Marcus, the power to reshape reality itself. We gave it to ourselves because no one else would protect us. The communication link closed, leaving the bridge of the Valerian flagship in stunned silence. Outside the viewports, the human fleet was already beginning to disperse, their ships vanishing into hyperspace with the same mysterious efficiency they had shown throughout the battle. General Thaxheim turned to face Marcus, his scarred features showing a mixture of gratitude and unease. Colonel, I owe you an apology. For 3 years, we treated you as a refugee seeking our protection. We never realized that you were the one protecting us. Marcus looked around the bridge at the Valerian officers who had accepted his command, then down at the planet where his wife was waiting for news of the battle, where his garden was probably being tended by servants who thought he might never return to it. General, he said quietly, I think I'd like to go home now. Home? Marcus smiled, reaching into his pocket for the neural suppressor that he had carried, but not used during the battle. The small device felt heavier than it should, weighted with the promise of 3 more years of peace if he chose to accept them. Yes, sir. Home to my garden. Home to my wife. Home to a life where the most dangerous thing I have to worry about is whether the tomatoes will ripen before the first frost. Kextar stepped forward, his mandibles clicking with what Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement. You know, brother, I think I owe you an apology as well. I spent 3 years calling you weak because I didn't understand that choosing to be weak when you could be strong is actually the most difficult thing of all. Marcus activated the neural suppressor and felt his enhanced awareness begin to fade. The tactical displays became just screens showing data instead of three-dimensional battle maps. The strategic implications of the human fleet's technology became abstract concerns instead of immediate problems requiring solutions. But as his mind settled back into the comfortable limitations he had chosen, one thought remained crystal clear. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. Every species would have to decide for themselves whether that knowledge made them safer or less safe. The hegemony had made their choice and learned the consequences. Now, it was everyone else's turn. 3 hours later, Marcus Chun stood in his garden under the light of Valoria Prime's twin suns, checking the tomato plants that had somehow survived the stress of orbital combat. The neural suppressor was firmly in place, dampening his tactical awareness back to normal human levels. Around him, the familiar sounds of peaceful domesticity had returned as if the battle had never happened. Zarabeth found him there as evening fell, her elegant form moving gracefully between the rows of earth vegetables. She had changed out of her formal military dress into simple clothes suitable for gardening, and her multifaceted eyes reflected the last light of the setting suns. "How are they?" she asked, kneeling beside him to examine a particularly promising tomato. "They'll be ready for harvest soon," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the gentle contentment that the suppressor allowed him to feel. The orbital bombardment missed this area completely. Lucky considering how close some of those shots came. They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, tending plants that connected Marcus to a destroyed world and a peaceful life he had chosen over duty. But eventually, Zarabeth spoke the question that had been hanging between them since his return. "Marcus," she said softly, "are you going to stay?" He looked up at her, seeing his own reflection multiplied in her alien eyes. The woman who had married a refugee gardener and discovered she had bound herself to a weapon of mass destruction, who had every right to feel betrayed, manipulated, and lied to. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. "I want my husband to stay," she replied carefully. "The man who tends this garden and cooks dinner and argues with my brother about crop rotation. But I need to know, is that man real, or is he just another identity you constructed for operational purposes?" Marcus considered the question as he pulled weeds from around a pepper plant. With the suppressor active, the tactical analysis that would have automatically evaluated her emotional state and calculated the optimal response was muted. Instead, he simply felt the weight of 3 years of genuine love and the fear of losing it. "The man who married you is real," he said finally. "The garden is real. The love is real. Everything else, that's just something I used to be." Zarabeth reached out to take his dirt-stained hand in hers. "And you want to take the suppressor off again?" Marcus thought about Admiral Vasquez and the human fleet scattered back into the void to continue their eternal vigilance against any threat to the survivors of their species. He thought about the tactical knowledge that still existed in his memory, accessible but dormant. He thought about the responsibility he had accepted when he chose this life over his duty to the remnants of humanity. "Not unless I have to," he said. "Not unless something threatens the people I love." They sat together as darkness fell over Valoria Prime, two beings from different worlds who had found something worth protecting in each other. In the distance, the lights of the capital city twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing lives that had been saved by secrets Marcus would carry for the rest of his peaceful existence. Above them, The stars themselves seemed different now. No longer points of light in an endless void, but destinations where human ships moved like ghosts, carrying technology that could reshape reality and a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The universe had learned what happened when you tried to exterminate humanity. Now the question was whether that knowledge would bring peace or simply a different kind of war. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Marcus Chun was exactly what he appeared to be. A gardener who loved his wife, tended his plants, and asked nothing more from a universe than the chance to live quietly on a world that had given him sanctuary. The neural suppressor hummed softly against his finger, maintaining the illusion that had become more real than the truth it concealed. And in his garden, under alien stars, humanity's most dangerous secret chose to remain hidden among the tomatoes and peppers that connected him to a home that no longer existed. Some weapons, Marcus reflected, were most powerful when they were never used at all.